Okay, so now we're going to talk about validation, or as I've written here, the subtle art of trying not to frustrate your users while helping them fix all the things they did wrong, which doesn't really feel like our responsibility, but I guess someone has to do it, and it's not like they can help themselves, otherwise they wouldn't have got themselves into this mess. This is going to be demo intensive because we're just going to look at demos for validation. That's the easiest way to do it, right? So let's start. We're going to look at data annotations first. So I have, let's mute that. I have here a model that we saw earlier today called a to-do item, and it has some data annotations on it. So you can see we have a required validator, a max length validator. So this title field will be both required and have a maximum length of 250. And that's it. You can see I've put some to-do items because I want some more advanced validation. I want this title to be unique. I don't want to be doing the same to-do item twice. And this nullable date time field, I want that to be required if the item has been completed. If done is true, then they should specify a date and time. Let's have a look at how that's working currently just by looking at Swagger UI and trying it out. So we'll start this application. As you saw before, we need to run npm start from the client app, and then we can just hit Control F5 on this one to start the back end. Has everyone seen that nice command line extension? So you can click on a folder, any folder you want, and go Alt space, and it'll open your command prompt or PowerShell. Anyone not seen that? It's pretty cool. Yeah, so we go to extensions and manage extensions. They made manage extensions very easy to find now, which is nice. It's the only option here. And if we jump in, and I have it already installed, so it's just, where is it? A new file? Why is it not there? That's interesting. Am I blind? Oh. Of course. Thank you, whoever shouted out scroll. I need more sleep. Let's scroll. Open command line. Yeah, so it's by Mads, and that's all it does. It just opens the command line, and you can kind of configure it. So I think it's here. If I scroll, I can open command line, and my default is the Windows command prompt, but I can specify developer command prompt, PowerShell, or alternatives if I come in and play with the settings. So that's pretty nice. So anywhere that I am, I can just open up that command prompt. So that's at the solution level. I can open it up at the unit test level. It's just great. The other tool that I really like that I can't live without is Shift F2. And that just allows you to add a new file. So that's the add new file extension. And let's say I wanted to create a new service in a subdirectory here. So I can go Shift F2 and I'll call it files, and I'll go and create my new files service.cs. And it'll do that. It'll create the directory, it'll create the files service.cs, and it's pretty cool. And I can also do Shift F2 and use relative pathing. So, you know, if I pressed it and I wasn't in quite the right location, it's no problem to go back a couple of directories and then do whatever it is I want to do. So anyway, a couple of my favorite extensions. Get rid of that. So Awesome Spar's running, it's fetching data, that's nice. We want to have a look at the backend API, and we want to have a look at the to-do items. See how the validation's currently working for that. Fingers crossed. Pressing F12 because that's taking a long time. Seems okay. Oh yeah, we're okay. So going into to-do items, as we saw before, we can get a list, but I'm going to create a new to-do item now. So we'll try this out. It's got kind of a JSON template there I can fill out. I don't need to specify an ID because it is connected up to a proper SQL server, and it'll supply an ID. So let's just try this. I'm not going to mark it. I will mark it as done, and I'll set completed to null. So we should hit a, no, we won't hit a validation error there because we haven't implemented that yet. Why don't we just set
title VLAN.
Yeah, I'll just set it
it's required yet.
Yeah, so it's required. So let's execute that, and see the response. Okay, so we get back a 400, and we get back a problem details DTO. So problem details was implemented in ASP.NET Core 2.2, and it basically is a way of describing API errors.
Yes,
according
RFC
to the
standard.
RFC standard, yeah. You can see it right there, RFC 7231. Which is pretty cool. So it just says the title field is required. And you guys know that if I go ahead and make this longer than 250 characters, it's going to say that it's too long. So I won't bore you with that. So that's kind of data annotations, and that's the experience you get out of the box. Not too much has changed. You know, for example, in the past, we used to have to actually. So what were we doing? We were creating a to-do item. So that's this method. We'd have to do stuff like this. If model state, not modal state, model state, I was right the first time, is valid, we'd say if model state is not valid, we'd go ahead and return a bad request and include all the details. We don't have to do that anymore. That's the implicit behavior when your API controller is marked with API controller. So life's pretty good, pretty simple. As far as data annotations go, but that's kind of the thing with data annotations, right? They're simple, and a lot of the time we want more advanced validation. And so for that, I prefer Fluent Validation. So let's have a look at how we can cover off some of those to-do items we had on the list, and how we can also clean up our DTO so that it's not cluttered with all of those attributes. So we'll save that, bring up our to-do item again. And you can see here, we're just going to start by just deleting this stuff. We'll leave the to-do item in. No, we'll get rid of that too. I know what I'm doing. So our to-do item entity, in this case, it should be a DTO, is decluttered. It's not decorated with a heap of attributes, so that's nice. And what we want to do now is just create a separate to-do item validator. And I also need to install Fluent Validation, I believe. Let me double check that. Yeah, we don't have that installed. So let's grab that now. We'll do it through the NuGet package manager this time. So if we go Fluent Validation, and the one we want is the Fluent Validation.ASP.NET Core version, because that has the dependency injection extensions, so that we can wire it in quite easily. So I'll go install. We'll load up startup.cs. And we need to add it here. So essentially we just go add Fluent Validation once we have the extension installed. But I'm just going to use my cheat sheet for that part. Here it is. So we'll grab that, paste that in, finish it with that, add in a namespace using Fluent Validation.ASP.NET Core, and that's it. So what this line does is it's an extension to iService collection. So it's going to wire up all of the validators that we have created. We haven't created any yet. And what it says here is register all validators from the assembly containing startup. So this class is not relevant. What's important is that it is a class in the assembly where we stored the validators. Now, if we had the validators in another project, such as in the clean architecture example, we have it in an application project, we just need to specify another class that's in that assembly. And what it will do is then scan the assembly for any validators and wire them up with Fluent Validation so that it can run these when validation occurs. We don't have to touch this anymore. And the reason that I make it startup class or something quite generic like that is because if I end up deleting a feature that contained a validator that was referencing here, I don't have to update this. I'm not going to touch this again. So that's kind of nice. So we'll save that. Now we can go ahead and add our validator. So I'm going to put it right alongside the to-do item. So we'll go Shift F2, to-do item validator.cs, just like that. Make it bigger. Now what we need is an abstract validator, which comes from Fluent Validation. The Fluent Validation package was brought in as a dependency to Fluent Validation.ASP.NET Core, so we didn't have to specify it directly. So we need to specify what we're validating. Clearly we're validating a to-do item. And then we can go ahead and generate a constructor. And this is where we can write our validation rules. I'm not going to write those either, but let's start simple. So we have a simple rule. Why don't you format for me? So this is a rule for title. The maximum length is 250 and it shouldn't be empty. So that's not much different to what we had before, but there's something interesting that you should know. Let me just build that. I should have run .NET Watch. So all we've done is wire up Fluent Validation with our service collection. And now I just want to run the app again. This is the item we tried to insert before. Just going to change that to null again. And execute. I think it's restarted. Right, we're still getting the same error, even though we're using a completely different validation tool now. And that's the wonderful thing about Fluent Validation. It wires straight into ASP.NET Core, so you don't have to go and jump through hoops. If you were checking model state, you'd see the Fluent Validation errors in there too. So it's a seamless transition, which is great. But we can do so much more with Fluent Validation. So let's have a look. So we've got this to-do item validator. One of the things we wanted to do was to ensure that the to-do item was unique. We can go ahead and inject our DB context and actually use our DB context in the validator just because of the scope of the validators. They're set to transient, which means we'll get a new instance of the validator each time we request one. And the DB context is set to scoped, and that means we'll only get one per request. So it's pretty safe to do. In the past though, I think the validators were set to singleton, so you could really get yourself into a lot of trouble. But we don't have that worry now, so we started doing that. So let's have a look. I'll use my cheat sheet again.
And we also had that problem with filters. MVC filters used to have a long-lived life cycle. So if you injected code into filters and it was not singleton, you would be in trouble.
Yeah.
So making filters that you need to hit the database, that's all been improved now as well.
Yeah.
Stuff just works first time without having to think about it.
That's great. So there's our context being injected in. We don't have to do anything more than that except set up a namespace, a using statement. And now, whoops, still the next part, which is this. We've got this new method, must async. So we're saying the title must be a unique title. A better name, be a unique title, just like that. And if it's not a unique title, we'll say the title must be unique. That will be our error message. So let's grab that method that I've created. Whoops. Which is this one. Here we go. Be a unique title and bring in the namespace for our cancellation token and for Entity Framework Core. There we go. So all we're doing here is saying, hey, for all the to-do items where the ID doesn't match the ID of the item we're trying to validate it, make sure there are no matching titles.
So that question was, do you put validations at the DTO level or the domain level? And the answer is kind of both. Certainly it depends. Definitely you always need to validate something coming in. So always validate the incoming DTO. You might have a really complicated domain model that needs extra validation before you save, in which case you can, by all means, put an extra level of Fluent Validation or whichever other engine you want to validate as you save as well. There is no right or wrong answer, but certainly always validate what's just come in over the wire, and then you can validate further if you so wish.
Think of your commands and your queries as your kind of first line of defense. It's where everything's going to be coming in. So yeah, you definitely want to apply those validators to those DTOs. So the query DTO and the command DTO. The validation at the domain level will be dependent on the needs of the domain. So, but this is your first line of defense. Okay, so we have that in place now. Let's have a look and see if it's working. I might just run that from the command prompt. So go .NET, watch, run. I prefer that. Kind of see it ticking over, it's nice. People think you're really busy while that's happening. Okay, so what we want is unique titles. So let's grab the existing list of items. Should be coming through. Maybe I'll hit it again. There we go. Okay, and so we've got a title already, do this thing. And so let's try to create a new one with that title. There we go. So title must be unique. So now we've got a nice custom validator within Fluent Validation that's actually checking in the database to see if the title's unique and still returning the error message for that in the usual way. You can see here that we've just seen kind of one message, but it could be multiple problems with title. So just keep that in mind. This is why this is a property with an array of error messages. There could be multiple problems. Yeah, so the question is, we're doing a DB hit for this custom validation, and what if we had to check several things on the DB? Well, the good news is that this is under our control, all of this code. And although we've encapsulated the DB request directly here within be a unique title, we could have like a private little helper method here that basically gets all of the info we need back from the DB in one hit, and then shares that with these helper methods. So we're in control of what we do here, which is nice.
Yeah, my feeling is there's multiple ways of doing this as well. You might decide that the first validation step is just going to be kind of functional and look at the raw data coming in and be things I can answer without any external dependencies and push the dependencies to inside the command. Or I might decide there's certain things I want to check before I even try and invoke the command. Maybe it's used across multiple commands, in which case it could be a validation rule at the top. So there's no hard or fast rule there and individual use cases, but certainly I wouldn't try and run multiple async, have to wait for them all to run, because that's going to slow it all down.
So
even though, yeah, go ahead.
Cool, no worries. So the other rule we wanted to create was done would be required, the rule for completed would be required if done has been flagged as true. So we're doing a little bit of cross-field validation, which is really easy to do. So we'll go and steal this, which is our next little helper function, and this one. So there we go. So we're saying the rule for done. This should be the rule for completed. Rule for completed. Oh wait, how did I write? I wrote that a little bit differently. So this would be the completed value. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, you're exactly right there. Let's rewrite it because it'll make more sense. Because I'm not using that value anyway, but I do need to pass it through like that. There we go. So we've got a rule for completed. Must have a completed date when done. We should probably be more explicit. Is true. And we're saying if the item is not done, then this is valid. We don't care about having a completed date. Or if the item is done, then completed date must have a value. So if it has a value, this is valid. So it'll return true. If it doesn't have a value, it'll return false.
And there's a second way of writing that as well. There is also the ability, there is a when clause. So you can place a when clause next to Boolean, and that switches off that rule. As well. So you can make a complex one by passing the function and deal with multiple queries, or have a single Boolean on a when clause.
Yeah. So how do we write that?
I think it's after the rule.
Oh, okay. So we say, so we would
must with message when.
So let's have a look at a different way. So basically we would be saying that the rule for completed is that it's required or not empty or not null. Would be good for when, and then we'd say validator, so when v dot done essentially.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a nicer way to write that rule. But
sometimes you need a more complex function because it doesn't fit nicely in the lambda expressions.
Yeah.
So you've got both options. You can take a full function reference or just put a little lambda expression in there.
Yeah. So this is good because you can see kind of how you could do a more complicated cross-field validation.
Awesome stuff.
So that's pretty much it. Just have a quick check on that.
But a key thing to point out is this level of complexity is just not available if you're using annotation-based stuff. Fluent Validation gives you the same capabilities of annotation-based stuff. It hooks in the same way, and it lets you build far more complex validations, including async, hit the database validation if you want to. But bearing in mind, like you say, if there's 50 of them to run, don't run 50 different async validations because you're going to, be waiting for 50 different database hits to complete.
So just a quick point on client-side validation. It's a bit like this sign. Keep out or enter. I'm a sign, not a cop. It's not going to stop anything if anyone wants to bypass it. So what we're saying here is that server-side validation is always required. Client-side validation is generally nice to have. It provides the best user experience unless you're going for performance, because client-side validation does have one really great benefit. It allows us to steal our users' resources. We can steal their CPU cycles and steal a little bit of the memory, run it on their machine so that if that form is invalid, it never hits our server, doesn't use our memory and CPU cycles. So when would that be important? Well, if we're trying to sell tickets for something like Splendor on the Grass, right? That website gets hammered. And so we don't want invalid requests coming through that could be easily checked on the client before they're even submitted to the server. So that's the two reasons: user experience and performance. Key points: avoid using data annotations for validation since they're only really useful for simple scenarios. In the past, data annotations were used within EF Core for validation also, but keep in mind that's no longer the case. They're only used for ORM style, so for mapping your object model to your relational model. And as Brendan's pointed out, the limitation with data annotations is they can't do they can't do everything anyway. For example, you can't do a many-to-many mapping with data annotations. You have to use EF Core Fluent API configuration for that. Fluent validation is useful for all validation scenarios on the other hand, and as you saw, it's straightforward to use. You can create some complex rules and it wires right into the existing pipeline. Server-side validation is always required. It's our last line of defense, but client-side validation is optional. Use client-side validation for the best user experience and use it to improve performance so that you're not hitting the server. And it can be something that comes later, so even if it provides the best user experience and that's something that you need, it doesn't mean you have to deliver it straight away. Like if you're trying to get a minimum viable product out, client-side validation is probably not going to make the cut.